Hi everyone, Anthony Fantano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of the new Weeknd album, Kissland. The Weeknd is the somewhat experimental, emotionally tortured, and kind of dark and moody R&B project of Canadian singer-songwriter Abel. Personally, I have a bit of a rocky history with this project, despite Abel's pretty decent falsetto, as well as some rave reviews. I firmly believe that his big breakout project, House of Balloons, that dropped in 2011, was one of the most unrewarding musical listens I had that year. The really thin production on this album ruined it for me, as well as the even thinner lyrical topics, which all kind of seemed like this desperate attempt to make excessive partying, drug use, and sex kind of introspective, meaningful, and deep. We have the character that Abel puts himself in these Weeknd songs, indulging in just about everything as much as he possibly can, all the while kind of painting himself as someone who is troubled, sensitive, and incredibly self-aware of the danger that I guess he's putting himself in. Impressively, Abel dropped 2 more free projects within a year's time, Thursday and Echoes of Silence. And it was kind of weird because as people were cooling down on the project, and I can understand why that was, because Thursday was definitely not as entertaining or as grand or as ambitious as House of Balloons for a lot of people, but I felt like I was warming up to what the Weeknd was doing, especially when Echoes of Silence dropped. The production improved in a big way, got way heavier, more lush, more vivid. The songwriting felt a lot more straightforward and to the point, a lot less moments where Abel was kind of just wandering over these repetitive beats with his vocals. And to me, on Echoes of Silence, his voice sounded way more raw, natural, and just human. And I think on that project as well, the dark vibe that Abel had been going for this entire time really sort of hit home for me. It actually felt real. This is the first project I'd heard from the Weeknd that to me was kind of chilling. I understand that dropping these projects within a year's time might have been a little bit of oversaturation, but I still don't see why Echoes of Silence doesn't get as much props as House of Balloons. Now, last year, all of these projects got repackaged and were commercially sold as a trilogy, which did kind of build the buzz up for this project again. All of the previous projects to drop from the Weeknd did get cleaned up a little bit sonically, and in my opinion, even though I didn't really love House of Balloons once this remaster came through, I did like the sound a lot more. So having heard these better sounds on this trilogy, enjoying Echoes of Silence, I was legitimately looking forward to whatever the Weeknd was going to do next. But then the single, the lead single, the title track for this album dropped, and my heart just sank. The instrumental on this track was just glistening. Not as much darkness or edge, in my opinion, as some of the previous beats to drop from the Weeknd, though I still think the atmosphere on this track was huge. The bass and the drums were slow, heavy, kind of crushing. But I think the most disappointing thing about it were Abel's vocals, his singing, and his lyrics on this song. Really, the entire track felt like a rehash of everything he had been doing for the past 3 Weeknd projects. Not only that, but it felt like Abel was backing away from writing those more straightforward songs and was getting back into that habit of just merely finding a beat, finding a groove, just repeating it over and over, and then aimlessly singing your story over it in a really badly paced way. Unfortunately, this really redundant songwriting style is exactly what Abel serves up for every single track on Kissland. The production is still large, is still atmospheric, in a way, kind of cinematic, but what always ends up disappointing, like I said earlier, it's the pacing. Take the song Adaptation, for example. It's just 4 minutes and 44 seconds, but it feels like it goes on forever. It's just got this really large, slow, lumbering beat that just repeats, and repeats, and there's not much changing up on this song. There's not much progression or alteration outside of the story that Abel is trying to tell in his lyrics. And if you dive into the lyrics, like adapted to the models who adapted to the bottle, they take it down like water just to burn away their sorrows, it's clear that Abel is not changing his lyrical game up on this LP. After listening to this album, I'm absolutely convinced that the Weeknd is not as lyrical as some people make him out to be. His stories are not as detailed or as fleshed out or as meaningful as people believe they are. And in my opinion, taking these themes and trying to make them really sad, trying to make them really emotional, to me just feels like throwing lipstick on a pig. And those lyrics I just mentioned are from a chorus where you have all these vocals stacked on top of one another. Something I think was placed into the track to kind of break up the monotony of the instrumental in Abel's voice. But whenever that attempt is made, it usually kind of comes out sounding ridiculous or just not that interesting. The chorus on the song Professional too is incredibly underwhelming and almost pointless and a non-chorus. This is love. We're professional. I think the most notable change in pace on this entire album came on the song Live For, where I never looked more forward to a Drake verse in my entire life. Though the song Wanderlust does kind of change gears for the album, it's this weird synth-funk track with this upbeat, funky groove that feels kind of Rick James inspired. But still, even this track doesn't develop that far past the funky groove it establishes at the beginning, and once again we're delivered another monotonous song, just this time it's got kind of a catchy groove. But I think maybe part of the issue with The Weeknd, not only his songwriting style, which does get kind of repetitive, but the instrumentals on this track too, which just don't show that much variation, and a lot of the very, very cloudy and atmospheric synths surrounding these tracks kind of take away the body of the songs and probably give them less character in the long run, because toward the end of this album, Pharrell Williams actually has a remix of this song, and it is way more enjoyable, mostly because the synths are way punchier and the instrumental itself is just a lot more colorful, a little fruitier, if you want to say that. And you know what? The thing is, even though the instrumentation feels a little more upbeat, I feel like that inherent sadness and just that melancholy The Weeknd brings to the table, it's still there. Overall, I feel like Abel kind of went easy on us with this album by not delivering any stories that felt fresh or new or bold for The Weeknd, for not bringing any instrumentals to the table that had any true character outside of their overuse of reverb and their really, really slow pace. There are even moments where I feel like Abel's vocals are a little bit more subtle, dainty, and just kind of understated than his vocals in the past. Even the last track on this album, there are some effects on his vocals that kind of obscure his voice and make it difficult to even make out what he's saying. And if The Weeknd has been consistent with anything up to this point, it has been having intelligible lyrics. While I think The Weeknd still has some potential to come through with something interesting in the future and still has a defined sound in the R&B world. When you hear a Weeknd song, you know it's a Weeknd song. But overall, this project just feels like a rehash of a lot of moments from The Weeknd's previous stuff, but done in a slightly less interesting way. While this record wasn't terrible to me, it wasn't, the worst thing in the world, there were some good points, but the good points that I heard here, I've already really heard from this project. I'm feeling a light 5 on this thing, honestly. Transition. But if you've given this Weeknd album a listen, what did you think of it? Did you love it? Hate it? Why? What do you think I should review next? And that's it. Anthony Fantano, Weeknd, Kissland, forever.